Welcome to Be Brilliant with Jing Lang, the podcast dedicated to those seeking to excel in every aspect of their lives. Through conversations with her guests, Jing will tease out personal stories, helpful tips, and proven strategies to help you elevate your life and reach your highest potential. Get ready to dive in and discover what it means to be truly brilliant. And now, here's your host, Jing Lang.
Born and raised in Canada, Jill Hoffman has spent most of her working life outside of Canada. A strong advocate for the actuarial profession, Jill is on the executive committee of the International Actuarial Association and currently serves as the chair of the Future Actuary Task Force. She is a regional head of internal audit at Munich Re, Singapore.
Can you give us a flyover journey of your career?
So I picked actuarial science back when I was in high school. We had an advisor, a teacher, have us do projects on our future careers. So I had picked actuarial science. I had learned about it from a guidance counselor, and I liked the mix of math and business. And my poor English teacher didn't know what an actuary was, and I'm going to date myself here, but he had to go look up actuary in the phone book and basically called them up and said, "Hi, I'm a high school teacher, and I have someone who's interested." So it was a pension consulting actuary from Eckler Partners. And I did a little data cleanup exercise, so just on paper and like making sure, genders made sense and checking dates of birth and all that sort of good stuff. So somehow that got me hooked, though. I'm not sure why. And so I went to University of Waterloo and graduated from there and did a series of co-op terms and then started my career in Toronto working for Prudential US and then NN. And then ironically enough, I ended up at Eckler Partners, but on the life consulting side. So my journey as an actuary has been on the life insurance side. So when I was hired at Eckler, they were expanding their business in the Caribbean. One of the clients I was assigned to is a Bahamian insurance company called Kalina. And so I was doing lots of consulting work for them. And then they eventually figured out that, what's cheaper than paying consulting fees is to just hire Jill full time. And I said, what's warmer than Toronto in November is the Bahamas. So I had just gotten married, and they also graciously gave my husband a job as well. He works in IT. So how do you say no? So we moved down there shortly after getting married. So we were in the Bahamas for 4 years, had our first child there. So he's not a Bahamian passport holder, though. You need to have a residency or a Bahamian parent to receive that. So he's Canadian. And when I was there, the company went through a series of acquisitions, right? Buying up basically blocks of a lot of Canadian companies used to have branches in the Bahamas, and they were selling off those businesses. We acquired a lot of that, and I used reinsurance to help fund it. So the company bought a lot of reinsurance from Munich Re. And the client manager there got transferred to Singapore. And I was like, if something comes up, let me know. And basically his second day on the job, he called me up and go, "Jill, I could use you now." So I'm like, I'm 11 weeks pregnant with the second one. But he took me on, and the company took me on and moved out to Singapore in May. And my second was born in August and had 12 weeks of mat leave and been with the company for 17 years. So I've had a variety of roles there. I was business solution actuary, then I was head of pricing, I was chief operating officer, / chief of staff role, and then I moved into internal audit about 5 years ago. And all the time, the Singapore office is a regional office, so always dealing with different countries and locations, which also made the role quite interesting as well.
Wow, what a journey. You had joked about this in the past, Jill, that every time you move from Winnipeg to Waterloo, Bahamas, and Singapore, you keep on moving to warmer climates. And I feel like you answered my question already, but I want to just tease it out more. What else drives your decision making beside the weather?
Sure. So, definitely University of Waterloo. So, of course, University of Manitoba is a fine school for actuarial science, but I guess just wanderlust struck and, wanted to live off on my own. And, it's a bit opportunity. And so when I was in the Bahamas, you get a lot of visitors, your Canadian friends come down in the winter to visit you. And, they're always like, "You're so lucky to live here." And I said, yeah, I am. I said, "But would you do it?" And they're like, "Oh, no, I couldn't, or my husband couldn't work, or I couldn't live away from my family." And I'm like, okay, so yes, I'm lucky, but it's also a choice that I'm making as well, right? So everything is a trade-off. And I remember, I'm pretty sure it was Dave Pelletier from RGA. He had given a talk a long time ago about his experiences of living abroad. And it really resonated with me. And he's like, you meet really interesting people, right? And you get to do interesting things. And that's really too what's, I'm not saying that people aren't interesting elsewhere, but you meet such a variety of backgrounds, and it just, I don't know, I really enjoy that. I remember one time we were sitting around the table at home playing Ticket to Ride. And so it was myself, my youngest son, my best friend, and her youngest son. And I realized we were all born on different continents, the four of us. So just those little type of moments. I really enjoy those, and I really enjoy the travel that you're able to do. Singapore is a great base to travel in Asia and Australia sort of region. And it just pushes you out of your comfort zone as well. I don't know what I would have gained with staying in Canada, right? You don't know the road not taken, but I'm really happy with the road that I have taken.
Love that. I spent some years outside of Canada as well, not nearly as long as you did, Jill, but I definitely vouch for meeting interesting people and encountering very different cultures. Kind of have to have an open mind in order to survive and thrive in a very foreign environment. So I want to go back to the actuarial work for a second. So you are in internal audit now. For those who is not familiar with this area, can you tell us what that is?
Sure. So internal audit is often described as the third line of defense. So internal audit is there to really look at, are the risks being properly managed? So with the third line, so you have the first line is your first line people, so your business people. So they've got to, and we think about it like, let's think from an insurance and a reinsurance point of view, but any type of company, how are they managing the risks? When you go to do a piece of work, do you do a 4I review? What type of controls do you have in place of a process so that mistakes don't happen, right? Then you have the second line, which is risk management. So risk management is the one that sort of sets out like, okay, well, what's our risk appetite? How are we going to manage this risk? And really sort of sets out a lot of the frameworks as well for the first line to implement, right? And then the third line comes in and we're like, okay, what are these frameworks we've defined as our risk appetite? And then how are they being lived and implemented? So internal audit differs from external audit as well. So we're all familiar with EY, PwC, I'll forget one of them. So, all of those big important KPMG, all those big important letters. And so external audit, their job is to assure the shareholders that the financial statements are correct. They don't care if the numbers are positive or negative. Are they displayed correctly? And are the processes for creating the financial statements strong? So they obviously do a bit more than that, but that's kind of their main reason to be. So internal audit is not limited to the financial statements. We look at the entire company. So at any one point in time, I could have on the go, so I cover the Asia Pacific, Middle East, and Africa region. I could have on the go at any point in time, say an HR audit in South Africa, non-life casualty treaty underwriting audit in Australia, and data protection in Japan. That could all be on my desk in 1 week. So this is the role that we play to help give assurance that the risks are, especially the operational risks, are being managed properly, and be able to tell that upper management and ultimately the board of directors is who we're responsible to.
Much higher variety of work than I had initially expected. So you have been a consulting actuary, head of pricing, chief operating officer, and now internal audit. I'm wondering, is there another role that you would love to do? Not just like, but love to do in your career?
And love is a strong word. And so it's hard to know because I wouldn't know until I've tried it, right? To go and say like, oh, you know what, I would love to do, then maybe I should be doing that now, right? So are there different things I would like to try? I've become quite close to our HR colleagues, and like HR kind of intrigues me, right? But this is one area that I would be open-minded to trying. But it's also like, as you know, I have like a lot of hobbies and stuff like that. That I'm not intrigued for doing as a job, interestingly enough. And I'm also quite intrigued by sort of the mentoring and coaching and training, that type of helping people. I always get a lot of energy from that. So that's something else that like intrigues me. But to go and say I would love to try it, I can't go that far of a commitment. Sorry.
As you're speaking, I feel there's a lot of threads that are coming together. Like when you say you think you might like to try HR, you're already a very strong mentor. You have mentored, to my knowledge, every single person in Munich Re Singapore. And me, I'm so grateful. And like in my mind, these are the mentoring, the coaching, and the HR, like they're all weaving together, right? It's about personal development. You're trying to help the person to develop as a professional and more importantly as a person. So like I feel like they're really connected. Very nice. Whatever you do next, I'm so excited. If you had to credit one thing, Jill, to your career progression and mobility, what would it be?
What would I credit? My husband. It's a bit the secret sauce. And frankly speaking, especially for women. So having that supportive spouse. So the first move to the Bahamas, right? It was, so they had offered me the role. And so my husband is in IT and I called them up and I said like, well, what about my husband, right? And they're like, well, we don't hire spouses. And we said like, yeah, fine, we understand that, but we don't know any in the Bahamas. So can you help us, network, and so we can just kind of make a more informed decision about if we want to do this or not, right? So we sent through his resume and we'll call some people. And the head of IT at the insurance company looked at his resume and like, why can't we hire spouses? So they were able to give him a job as well. And then when our oldest son was born, he decided to take some time off of work to stay at home with him for a little while. And when we moved to Singapore, he sort of took a little bit of a break from work and then he started up his own consulting. And now he works for a company. But if we didn't have that support, and we've always put in there too that the default option is if one of us says we want to move back to Canada, that default vetoes over everything, right? So we established those ground rules before we left. That's to me is the enabling factor, is having that supportive husband, right? And similarly, when people are like, Jill, you're so lucky to live in the Bahamas. No, it wouldn't work for my husband. But I'm like, okay, well, there you go. So that I find is the secret sauce a lot of times for successful careers for females and for males as well, right? There's that old expression, behind every successful man stands a strong woman, right? I think that's true for women as well. It's a partnership to make a career happen.
I like that. And I can echo that with my own experience as well. When I went to the US, I dragged my husband along and he was kind enough to be willing to drag along. So yeah, that's amazing. Jill, you had called yourself a Jill of all trades. This came to me as a complete shock because you had been in all the actuarial roles as technical as it gets. Like, why do you consider yourself as a generalist as opposed to a specialist?
Well, no, it's a Jill of all trades, master of none. You have to complete the sentence. But it's because I have tried lots of different things. And I actually don't mean it as an insult to myself. I mean it as a compliment. So I think the fact that I have tried lots of different things and have thrived, some things more than others, right? So doing technical actuarial work is not my passion, but having sort of more generalist roles and, overall problem solving and really looking at the picture with a different lens, the governance lens as well, those type of roles, it brings a lot of different skill set. So, and in my role before Audit, this is what I did, was I solved sort of all those problems that didn't fit into a neat home, right? Oh, it's not pricing, it's not valuation, it's not accounting, it's not this. Where does it fit? And bringing together all the people at the table properly and stuff. So this is kind of why I call myself Jill of all trades, master of none.
So switch on to volunteering. So you're the chair of the Future Actuary Task Force at the International Actuarial Association. What is the mandate of the task force?
This came up when I was on the strategic planning committee. So I represented the Singapore Actuarial Society on the strategic planning committee, and we were looking at what are the bigger problems that we want to tackle over the next couple of years. And so I just sort of raised, well, what is the future of the actuary and and what's it mean for the IA? What's it mean for the Actuarial Associations? I'm like, Jill, it's a great question. You should answer it. And I was like, oh. So that's my first lesson learned. Don't ask a question you're not willing to answer, but I'll never learn that because I will always ask questions. And so when we first started out, it was very overwhelming, right? And ideas are coming in all different directions. And eventually I broke down the problem into an actuarial control cycle. So what are the risks and opportunities that we face? What is the skill gap that we have versus the risk and opportunities? How are we going to fill that? Then how are we going to build up supply and demand? So we started off first with the risk and opportunity radar. So we looked at the risk and opportunities. And so this report is available, and hopefully Jing will be able to put the link into the show notes. And it doesn't give any definitive answers. In fact, it just raises more and more questions. But I started thinking about, the actuary of the future, and it kind of correlates to a person's own individual career path as a way as well. So when you first start off your career, and when people first think of actuaries as well, it's very technical, right? Like, we're great at math. We can do all this analysis. We've got a lot of this is who gets drawn into actuarial science as a career. Then as your career progresses, you need to be able to do the problem solving. So great, you can analyze it, but can you explain it? What does this analysis mean? What is the impact of it? So when we think about for actuaries, right, those communication skills, we're going to need those. We need them in the past. We need them in the future. Every human being needs them. It's not just actuaries. But, being able to explain the analysis. And then when we think when we get, further on in your career, sort of to the peak of your career, this is where you're going to need the strategic thinking. This is where you need the leadership, the emotional intelligence. And I would say probably for, our skills, we do really great at, of course, all those technical skills at the beginning. We do okay for those those skills sort of midway through your career. And I think where we've got a bit of a gap now is how do we build those leadership skills? And then how do we go up? And obviously individuals have them, but I wouldn't say that they've gotten them through work and through volunteering, but it's not like necessarily through CPD and professionalism in that sort of structured manner. And I think we also need to do a better job of explaining to those who use actuaries, like, hey, we do have these skills. And I think the one skill that we have that we maybe undersell a little bit is synthesis. So we can bring together, we know this from underwriting, we know this from claims, we've got this information from accounting, we've got this from our experience study. How does this all come together and what does it mean? So this is where I find the actuary is uniquely positioned in the company because they have to talk to all these different entities. And then we also looked at the domains. So we have our traditional domains: insurance, pension, risk management. Some domains vary from area of the world to the area of the world. So South Africa is strong in banking, Australia is strong in data analytics. But again, looking further down, there's artificial intelligence. Do we want to get in? We're trying to get better into climate change, right? So we're used to dealing with property risk, right? So climate change, how is this going to impact insurance, both on the non-life and the life side, on health even. So, and then how do we go explain this to people like, at the COP24 and sort of say like, yes, actuaries are interested in water. Okay, what do you know about it? Wow, we're really good with the math that we can do and the risk analysis from the math. But, so this too is where, as we look forward to the future, what is it that we want to be adding to the educational curriculum? So that paper is available, like I said, raises a lot of questions, doesn't have a lot of answers. And so the skill gap in the education piece, I've tossed to the education committee. And so then I'm working on the supply and demand. So that's currently under play. And what we're looking at, we've sort of divided it into 4 groups, stakeholders. So from supply side, you have the students themselves, but you also have the gatekeepers. And what I mean by the gatekeepers is who are the adults in the ecosystem around the student? How are they going to hear about actuarial science? Just like insurance, nobody wakes up and says, I'm going to go buy insurance today. Nobody wakes up and says, I'm going to go research actuarial science. You have to hear about it from somebody. It's not like lawyer, doctor, accountant. It's not a well-known profession that way. We sometimes set up at the top of like best jobs to have, but we kicked off by the data scientist, which is a very similar job, by the way, but okay. So, so how do we reach, those gatekeepers? A lot of people, I was talking to some of the young people at my company and saying, how did you hear of actuarial science? These are people who are still like in first couple of years of working. And it's like, it's no different than before when I was pre-internet in the Flintstone era. Like, oh, it was my friend's brother is in it, or I saw a brochure at university, or a teacher told me. So, they'll go afterwards and research it more on the internet, but it's word of mouth, this profession, unfortunately. So then that's the supply side. So then what about the demand side? So of course, the traditional employers, your insurance companies, your pension companies, they all know what actuaries can do. But are we being pigeonholed into what we can do, right? Should we have actuaries in audit? Should we have actuaries in HR? Should we have actuaries in, CFO and other leadership positions as well, right? And that varies from market to market as well. So, for the traditional employers, it's also like, don't just limit us to statutory roles. And that's a lot on the individuals in the company too. And then as I spoke earlier, then there's the non-traditional employers. So how do we get the word out that, hey, we're here? And I think we need to be strategic about this. So there's going to be individuals that are going to forge their own paths. And so they should. What I love about actuaries is actuaries love to hire actuaries. We're like bunnies. You get in there and we start multiplying. But, when it comes back to the education syllabus, then, we have to strategically, where is it that we're going to want to have people learn about, right? And where are we going to put the resources? So I think this is a question for the educators to think about and to solve, and where, if you create the supply, is the demand going to be met? Is the demand going to be there to soak up the supply? So that's a bit of a chicken and an egg, but there's not a lot of us in the world, as Charles said in your previous podcast, right? So we're probably around 70,000. And I suspect, I'm not sure how accurate that number is because I'm 4 times in that number with my various different memberships, but there's others who aren't. So this is, so that's the Future Actuary. Please do check out the report, and there will be more coming from us on the supply and demand side in the near future.
Thank you. Wow. So happy that the report is out. And look forward to have more bunnies joining the crowd. So clearly you're a very advocate for the actuarial profession. You have been the president for the SAS. You're now deeply involved with the IAA. What got you started volunteering for the actuarial profession?
Sure. I didn't do any until I moved to Singapore, to tell you the truth. Before I was writing exams, and then I was in the Bahamas. In the Bahamas, there was 2 actuaries on island. There wasn't much to do there at that point in time. And so then when I moved to Singapore, basically, after I'd been in Singapore I'd come off of my 12-week mat leave. And so maybe I'd been in Singapore for close to a year at that point in time. And I just thought, well, you know what, I should let me reach out to Singapore Actuarial Society. So I wrote them an email and said, hey, I'm interested in volunteering, like maybe on the life side, because I work in reinsurance. So, let's drum up some business. And they wrote back and like, hey, would you like to be secretary? And I was like, wait, what? And so we had a meeting, and basically he was looking to get rid of secretary. So I said, oh, okay, sure, I'll do it. And so I was secretary for 2 years. And so the first time I wasn't voted in, just council kind of accepts you, right? And then it's election after that. And then the president was like, well, Jill, do you want to be the next president? I'm like, yes, that's so much better than writing minutes. So then I was president for 4 years. So it was a little bit of a longer term. So we're elected each year. So we don't have like the IAA or the IFOA or others with the succession plan. We vote in the council we call it a council in Singapore every single year. But basically, we don't really run contested elections very often. So So I was for 4 years basically to see out Singapore was hosting the East Asian Actuarial Conference. So this was about 700 or 800 people, which is a big conference for us at the time. So just kind of, I saw that out, and then I stepped down and was on council as ex officio for a very, very long time. So, I don't know, maybe 10 plus years. Time has no meaning anymore. And so now I devote most of my volunteer time with the IAA.
So speaking of IAA, that's how you and I met. We met in Singapore just a few months ago for the AI summit. So what piqued your interest about artificial intelligence, Jill?
So I kind of was co-opted onto the AI task force because of the Future Actuary. AI is, for myself, I probably am still a little bit more on the skeptical side. So yes, AI is here, it's coming, people need to learn it. I view it as a tool. So it's like you have to learn Excel, right? And, so this is, and I'm, I still sometimes wonder how many we got, what do they call it? Mechanical Turks in the background for some of this AI stuff. And is it killing the climate as well, is another question that I have. But I think that it's something that, we can't ignore. I think that much like how Microsoft and Google and Facebook, I think there'll probably be one or two winners are going to float to the top. So hopefully people will, when they're on their learning journey, pick the right ones. And I think the impact of what the actuary has to know depends a bit on where they are in their career as well. Right. So when I think about my children who, my oldest is in university now, I'm like, well, this is kind of good because he's coming in at the ground floor of AI. He's going to be able to learn it from scratch and, show people up. People like myself who are more in leadership positions and we're not doing the technical work, we need to understand it from what can it do, possibilities, and, what's the governance surrounding it and stuff like that. But to get down deep into the mire of it. So I think the real learning curve and where it's going to be, people are really going to have to be open-minded is those who are kind of like their 30s and 40s who are closely managing the people who are using it or are going to be the people using it themselves as well. So I might be like 1 or 2 layers away from that. But I need to understand what is the possibilities that we can do with it and set directions of hey, how can we use AI to help us do better audit or use data analytics for better audit. I'm not necessarily going to be the one doing the prompt chat GPT programming, right? So I think it's going to mean different things to different people. I think it will just, I don't know, it seems like every new technology just creates more work. So I'm not quite sure how that's going to go, right? Here's more computing power. Great, I can make more complex models, right? So now I can do more runs over the weekend, right? So I'm not 100% based on the past, not 100% sold on that it's going to mean less work for anybody.
Fair. Let's bring it back to the human. So you enjoy mentoring. How do you measure success?
So success via mentoring, I guess.
Success, when you have a relationship with someone, you chat on a regular basis, how do you measure that that relationship was successful to the person being mentored, and I guess to a certain degree to yourself as well? Because I hope it's not just time donated, that hopefully you also get something back from the interaction.
Yeah. So I guess for me, it's hard to say a relationship is successful. But I think in terms of, let's say, business mentoring, right, the success to the mentee can be measured in achievements. So have they achieved their goals that they want to achieve? Was the advice that I gave, did it resonate? If they implemented it, did it work? If they implemented it, didn't work, then maybe that's not as much, but then that's a learning point, right? So I think, so certainly we can look at it from that point of view of how did the mentorship turn into achievement for them. But I don't know if I would call that the sole measure of success. So to me, the success there's a successful relationship if they keep coming back for more. So that's one tangible measure. But it's really, how does the person feel afterwards, and how do they feel after the advice was implemented. And maybe sometimes the advice is a little bit hard to swallow, but I'll go do it anyways, right? And they do it, and okay, it wasn't that bad, or it was bad, but I'm glad I did it. So I think the success really is how at the next meeting do they feel about what happened in between the meetings, and what actions that they were able to take, right? As opposed, like, the achievements are a measure of success, but success really is, to me, how they've grown as a person.
Do you get anything from the relationship?
Oh yeah, for sure. So I get lots of interesting questions, and it makes me think a lot, and it expands my mind. So Jing, as you said, like, you and I have a relationship, and you come to me and you're like, well, and I'm doing this, and this, sort of almost an accountability type of thing. And then I'll say, oh, that's interesting. Well, have you thought of X, Y, and Z? But I haven't done what you're doing. So I admire you a lot for what you're doing. And so I grow because listening about, you're like, well, I did A, B, and C. I'm like, oh, okay, that was the first 3 steps. And then I'm like, okay, well, did you think about X, Y, and Z? That's the next 3 steps. So I gain a lot learning from the people that I talk with, as well as, I get energy from it and enjoyment. And so that's what I get from it, is really that learning and just being asked those questions, and like, okay, so it's so much easier to answer them when it's not your own life, but then you can put that into practice for yourself, right? So I've come into difficult situations. I'm like, okay, so Jill, if Jing was coming to you with this question, what would you tell her? Yes, of course, that's the right answer. Okay, then go do that. And then I'll be like, oh, wow, my advice is really hard to take. So I gained a little bit of empathy for some of my advice.
Thank you for those advice. You have lived all around the world. Mm. You have regular mentor conversations with other people. How has all these different experiences shaped your work?
So that's a difficult one to say, because you don't have a test case you don't have like choice A and choice B and say, oh, this is how I turned out if I did these experiences, and this is how I would have turned out if I've had those experiences, right? So that's difficult. That's difficult to say how specifically, but every new experience hopefully opens up your mind, hopefully gains you a little bit more empathy, gains a little bit more understanding of the world. So, and you can gain this not only from living abroad, but you can gain this from travel, you can gain this from reading, you can gain this from talking to people with different backgrounds. There's lots of different ways to get it. So you don't have to go and, move halfway around the world for half your life to gain it. So I think, but they definitely have, obviously it's like shaped me and that, but at the end of the day, no matter where you live, you kind of have the same life as well, right? Like, okay, you get up in the morning, you go to work all day, maybe where you eat lunch is different, you come home, maybe what you watch on TV is different, or whatever your evening activity is. And then what you do on the weekends, maybe varies a little bit, but if you like being an outdoor person, it doesn't matter where you live in the world, you're always going to be, I'm going to go do something outdoorsy. If you're an indoor person, you're going to do your indoorsy things. So this, it's just a little bit, what do you see outside the window? So you kind of, what's that song says, wherever you go, there you are, right? Like you're always still going to be yourself, but the goal is always to be growing.
I love that saying. I spent many years of my life running away from myself. And then I realized my mind is here regardless where exactly. I go. So I have to work with this one first.
You around, right?
That's right. Well, can you tell us about your core values?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about it, and I've been having a couple of conversations about that this week as well, because I've been having lunch with some people, and they've been having some struggles at work, and I'm like, I think they're rubbing up against your value. I would say it's integrity, right? So with audit, we got to be whiter than white. So we've got to do everything with integrity. It's part of the actuarial code as well, right? Like we've got to do the right thing. Then it's also like fairness. So I find that when things really kind of rub me the wrong way, it's if there's like a big sense of unfairness, and maybe I'm not always fair. It's like, what's unfair unless it's unfair in my favor? But like you sometimes have unfairness. And in actuarial science, it also comes through. Like we're always like, well, are you cross-subsidizing the rates? But I think also layering that with like an element of pragmatism. So we're not always going to come to a complete 3-second stop at every single stop sign when we drive, right? Of course I do if anyone's listening, but let's just say if I saw someone on a country road in the middle of the night, they didn't do the full 3-second stop, I'm not going to judge them on that, right? I don't know if pragmatism is a value, but I kind of have a strong layer of pragmatism on top of that as well. So like, let's do the right thing. Obviously, I'm in a governance function, so I want the governance done the right way. Do we have to have a platinum plated solution every single time? Probably not.
I highly value pragmatism. To me, it's similar to the saying, good is the enemy of perfect, right? I much prefer getting something done than never getting it done, waiting for perfection, like using that as a reason to not finish.
No, and just to build on that point, if I can for a minute, Jing. So I do sewing. As you know, I'm a big crafter. So I took up sewing during COVID. So there was a big learning curve. And, it's very easy in crafting to become a perfectionist. And you'd be like, oh my God, this isn't perfect. And, this is where good is good enough, right? I'm like, okay, I will know where the mistake is, but nobody else has clothing that you've made unless like it's so glaring, then you're going to fix that. And frankly speaking, after wearing it for like the first time, you forget where the mistake is. Like nobody knows where there's the wobbly stitch, or yes, this could have fit like slightly better, but like look at all the ready to wear clothes, like they're not fitting any better as well. So sometimes like learning a new skill can sort of knock a little bit of perfectionism out of you because you're like, well, done is better than perfect, right?
I cannot think of a better place to end than on that note. Thank you so much, Joe. I really appreciate you being here today and sharing your wisdom.
I really enjoyed myself. Thank you, Jing.
That's a wrap for today's episode of Be Brilliant with Jing Lang. We hope you found valuable insights and motivation to fuel your journey. Be sure to like and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. And share this with 3 people in your life endeavoring to achieve personal greatness. Remember, brilliance is within you, and every step you take brings you closer to your best self. Keep striving, keep shining, and until next time, stay brilliant.